All right, in this video, we're going to come back and look at the deposit multiplier in the real world. Okay, so this is the deposit multiplier in the real world. How does it work? Is it a little different than what we talked about? So the answer is it basically works the same way, except for in the real world it's going to be a little bit smaller. So remember, this multiplier was this way, 1 over the required reserve ratio. So for example, again, if you have to keep 10% of the deposits, then this would end up being 10. So that would mean you put $1 of new reserves, like for example, you deposit $1 into the bank, creates $10 in deposits because we only need 10 cents. The logic here is you need 10 cents to back each dollar of deposits. So that's our logic here, right? So but what we're saying is, well, in the real world, it's likely smaller, right? So the real world, this multiplier is likely smaller. So the real world multiplier is likely to be quite a bit smaller than 10, for example, if we had a 10%. So it's likely smaller than 10. Okay, so why? Well, two main reasons why. Why is that true? Well, first, so the question is why. The first is the banks might be more conservative. So if a bank is a little bit worried about the future, they may, or doesn't have very good prospects for loaning, they might be more conservative, right? We wish they had been more conservative preceding the financial crisis. So they will, instead of loaning them out, they will keep extra reserves above the required amount, above the reserve requirement. So what was that? Sorry about my handwriting. Above the reserve requirement. Okay. So how does that work? Well, remember, like say for example in our example, the reserve requirement was the required reserve ratio is 10%, but they decide to keep 20%. Okay, so instead of they must keep if we have $1,000 new reserves, new deposit, right? They must keep $100, but they decide to keep $200, right? They're gonna play it safe. Okay, so if they do this, then this will make the deposit multiplier smaller because they will loan less each round. So as they loan less each round, then there will be less new money. So this creates less deposits. Because remember, the process of loaning and then the person who receives the loan redepositing it, and then somebody else borrowing and then paying for something and redepositing it was what was creating these deposits. So if the loans get smaller, the deposits get smaller. So the second thing, there's a second factor here. So the banks play a role. Their behavior can change this. And there's a second one is, well, let's suppose you sell something online. Okay, so you go on I think use the app, let's say Letgo, and you sell your bike. You sell your bike for $500, and somebody, let's suppose they borrowed the money from a bank, and they come and pay you for your bike. You receive this money. You may not put this all back. This money may not all end up back in the banking system. So some of you might just put this money in a shoebox and put it underneath your bed, and you got $500 sitting there in the shoebox. Now the process has been stopped. So because it doesn't end up back in a bank, it can't get reloaned, and it can't generate new deposits. Okay. You also might just keep part of it. So you keep $100 underneath your pillow, and the other 400 you put in the bank. So again, the 400 is still being multiplied, but the 100 has stopped. It's not being multiplied anymore. Some of you might be thinking, well, what if I pay somebody? What if I then go out and just blow the money? Well, yes, but somebody else gets it. So there really is what happens to it eventually. So if eventually the money ends up back in the banking system, it can be multiplied, but it doesn't all end up back in the banking system. People keep some cash. So they keep some of the funds they receive in cash, right? And so it doesn't get multiplied. If it's not in the banking system, yeah. So these summarize our two reasons why in the real world we expect the multiplier to be quite a bit smaller. One is the banks might be a little bit more conservative, and they might not loan out the maximum amount each time. So then each loan will be smaller. And also, some of the funds that are received will be held in cash, and because they don't end up back in the banking system, then they're not available to be multiplied. They're not available to be loaned out again, so the multiplication, at least of those portions, just goes ahead and stops.